Good morning. I've already done one Periscope, brief one about Tommy. I'll cover Tommy at the end of this one because you'll understand why. This week was a very, very tough week. Really tough. I'm Brian of London. I'm in the park in Tel Aviv, where I usually Periscope from. I used to live in London, grew up there. 10 years ago I moved to Israel. Now I live here. And this week was tough because last Sunday we heard news that there'd been another one of these stabbings. Now, in Israel, we don't wait for... We pretty much know. When someone goes stabby in public, it's jihad. It's a Palestinian Arab trying to stab a Jew to get to Allah and his virgins or to get put in an Israeli jail and his family get given a nice pension and so forth. Another stabbing. I carry on my day. But turned out later I found that this was different. Now, the reason it was different was because I knew the guy. He was a guy called Ari Fuld. And I know him for years because every time I've been to a pro-Israel or done anything to do with Israel advocacy in Israel over the last few years, I've bumped into him. And we've chatted on social media countless times. I've watched his videos, he watches my videos, he tweets my name. And last Sunday, he went to the supermarket. His wife sent him to the supermarket because Tuesday night into Wednesday was Yom Kippur. And even though Yom Kippur is the day we fast, the big thing about Yom Kippur is having enough food in the fridge so that on Wednesday night, when you can eat again, you have a good meal. And so everybody's shopping, everybody's filling the fridge, it's busy. So his wife sent him to the supermarket, and he went to the supermarket nearest him, where he lives, and I'm going to explain where he lives, and I'm going to explain why it's important and different, but not very different. And while he was at the supermarket, he was on his phone. He was talking on his phone. And a kid watched him, because we can see from the CCTV pictures, a kid watched him for a little bit. Then the kid walked over to him, pulled out a knife and stabbed him in the back. Pulled out a knife, stabbed my friend Ari Fuld, who's a big guy, in the back. Bang, bang. As he's being stabbed, Ari turns around and starts to fight with this kid. Okay? He then pushes him away and the kid turns and runs. Ari stumbles a bit, but then he runs after him. The kid jumps over a barrier and he's heading towards other people with his knife in his hand. And instead of just like waiting to be helped, because there's other people there who can deal with this, but always when there's an attack like this, the trained people are trained to shout pigua, pigua, which means attack, attack, or they shout terrorist, terrorist, and they point. Ari did one better because he chased after him and he drew his gun. He jumped over a wall, stumbled a bit, had his gun drawn and shot at the terrorist. By then other people had drawn guns. And I'm going to tell you an alternate ending. Avi Abelo, another friend of mine, he put this in his scope yesterday. I want you to understand how the world would work. If it had ended like this, if my friend Ari Fuld, who was a soldier, had been in the IDF for years in the paratroopers, one of the more elite brigades, and when he's 45, when he was 40, they sent him his papers to leave the army and he tore them up and said, no, I'm not leaving, I'm coming back every time. And he carried on going to his army unit just because you couldn't keep him away. He drew his gun and he shot the guy. Now, if it had ended like this, if the Arab had been killed and my friend had collapsed but been helped and taken to hospital and patched up and was alive, then the headlines would be screaming. All your British headlines, your American headlines, they'd be screaming, settler kills Arab. But that's not unfortunately how it ended. I'll tell you how it ended. It ended with me 3 o'clock in the morning, standing a few kilometers from Ari's home while they put him in the ground. So it ended at 3 o'clock in the morning, as far as I'm concerned, with me standing with thousands of people on a hillside way above Jerusalem at 800 meters. There were so many people that the little room in which the funeral was held, because that's how we do it here. I'll explain about Jewish funerals because people were asking me on YouTube. There were thousands of people. You couldn't get in the room. Standing room only inside, standing room outside. Somebody flew a drone over not me, that wasn't me, I didn't fly my drone. Somebody flew a drone and you just see people out into the darkness because the funeral was scheduled at 11:30. It didn't really start until 12:15 at night. So what happened was Ari died at the scene or pretty much in the ambulance. The Arab survived, he was shot. I don't know by whom, I don't know whether Ari got a shot that landed or someone else, but he was shot, but he was in moderate condition, taken off to one of our great Israeli hospitals where he will live. His family has been paid $3,500 so far. If he's convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, which he may well be, even though he's 17, that's a contentious point. Is he a child? No. He'll get millions. He could get $1 million over the next few years in what's called pay to slay. Arabs are paid to kill and murder Jews. So my friend Ari was murdered in Gush Etzion at the supermarket. Now the way that the press will tell you is that Ari was a settler because of where he lived, and that where he was murdered was a settlement. But let me just explain to you where it was. So to the south of Jerusalem, on the hills to the south of Jerusalem, is a block called the Gush Etzion block. Right in the middle of that is today a supermarket and a little shopping centre. A nice place that I've sat a few times. And because it's in a block which some call disputed territories, or I call Judea, where Jews come from. Jerusalem sits to the north of Judea, Samaria's north of Jerusalem. Because of where it is located, there's almost free travel from Arabs. There's tons of Arab villages around there, and there's also Jewish towns. Now the Jewish towns are generally gated, have walls around them, and in fact Ari was a significant member of the defense committee of his, where he lived, which is a place called Efrat. I think he lived in Efrat. And they're defended. But the Arab towns are largely open, which means that Arabs can get to this supermarket. Now there's a security guard at the supermarket, but the car park and so on, it's a mixed area. In fact, it's held up as an example of coexistence, this supermarket, the Rami Levy at Gush Etzion Junction. Most of the workers there are Arabs. The guy standing behind the butcher's counter with a 1-foot-long machete cutting up your steak is an Arab. This kid was there. He ordered a falafel from the falafel woman, who now has a sign on her shop thanking Ari for saving her life, because he was running, the terrorist was running towards the falafel woman who he'd just bought his falafel from when Ari shot him. It's unthinkable. And the demonization that will happen is, Ari also, let me tell you a bit about Ari. I don't know how he did what he did. He spoke for Israel. He spoke on TV shows. He did speaking tours when he could. But mostly what he did was he raised money and he did stuff to make just for the IDF soldiers. He wasn't part of this big corporate Friends of the IDF thing that sucks up vast amounts of money and then delivers some. Ari took money and just gave it all away. He did not live a lavish life. He leaves a wife and 4 beautiful children. His wife spoke, I'll tear up if I start talking about it, but his wife spoke so amazingly at the funeral at 2 o'clock in the morning as we stood there. I drove up from Tel Aviv. It's an hour's drive. 3 friends. I just put up, I said, I'm going. Whenever it is, I'm going. Took 3 other people joined me in my car. We parked. We got there. We were we got there more than an hour before the scheduled start at 11:30. And we parked, shut up birds, we parked more than a kilometre away. That was where the police made us park. When we left later, we walked back to the car and we drove out, and the cars were more, for the next 2 or 3 kilometres on the road, there were cars everywhere. And this is in Gush Etzion. It's remote from Tel Aviv, somewhat remote. It's actually only an hour's drive at night. It's very easy to get to. You have to drive through a place called Beit Shemesh, House of Sun, and then you drive up, because it's a big climb, because where the funeral happened was at something like 900 meters, and of course I'm sitting at sea level here. And it was dark. It's a small cemetery. Now let me tell you about Gush Etzion, this whole block. This whole block is land that was... It's not the world's greatest agricultural land, but it can grow grapes and olives, and if you know what you're doing and you love that land, you can make it fruitful and you can live there. And Jews started returning to it in the late 1800s, I believe, the start of the 1900s. And also down, it surrounds Hebron. And you have to know, Hebron was a Jewish city because it was the first city where Jews, it's where Abraham bought the cave to bury his wife. The patriarchs and the matriarchs of Judaism are buried there in Hebron. And this area sits above it, around it. It's sort of connected with it. Jews came back there to live, and again, it's dotted with places of Hebraic, religious, biblical significance. The Road 60, which is called the Way of the Patriarchs, runs from the north to the south, and it runs right through the middle of the Gush Etzion block. And this block, Jews had come back to, and by 1948, it's little towns, kibbutzes and so on, and moshavs had grown up there, and there were hundreds, even thousands of Jews living up there. It was empty, and they came back and they made it work, and it was tough, but they built homes there and they started agriculture. And what happened in 1948, when the War of Independence broke out, was that the Royal Jordanian Legion, backed by the British, trained by the British, armed by the British, swept through it. And a few hundred people with tens of rifles were left defending this land. And eventually they succumbed. Many were killed, some were massacred, there were massacres of civilians, and some got captured and allowed to leave. But for the want of 1,000 men and 1,000 rifles, this land was lost to the Jews. They'd been living on it peacefully, happily. They hadn't taken it from anyone. It had never been occupied. It had never been lived on, never been farmed. It was virgin land, really. As you'll see, if you ever drive around up there, you'll see the hills are just mostly empty. Nobody's living there. Nobody has to be kicked off in order to build a Jewish town. And so in 1948, the Jordanians took this and occupied it. Later, they went on to take half of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. For the first time in its history, Jerusalem was divided into an east and a west because of this conquest and illegal occupation by Jordan. In fact, the only people who recognized the illegal occupation of parts of Israel by Jordan were the British and the Pakistanis. And that's how it was until 1967. And in 1967, again, Israel was attacked by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, even Iraq. And in a war of defense, Israel beat back the attackers and took back that land, Gush Etzion, south of Jerusalem. They took back Hebron. They took back the northern part of Samaria, what is geographically the western bank of the Jordan River. We didn't go past the Jordan River into what is today called Jordan, the country of Jordan, which used to be part of British Mandate Palestine, and which was a carved off British Mandate Palestine and just given to a Hashemite king to appease him and for his fealty, even though it wasn't all that great. So we just went up to the Jordan River and stopped. And that land we took back because it's essential for the safety of Israel. And we live there. And people like Ari Fuld build their homes there up in Efrat. They build beautiful towns and they build shopping centers where Arabs can get employment. And they generally enhance the land in ways you cannot imagine. With them comes roads, comes infrastructure, comes electricity, telephones, all of that modern stuff that the Arabs love, but don't want to admit it and will never build for themselves. All of that is there because Jews live there. And the only reason it's attractive for Arabs to live there is because Jews live there. And that's actually the story of Israel. There were very few people in the whole land of what is today Israel and Jordan. There were 200,000 or 300,000 souls in the mid-1800s, according to US consular reports. Today, there's 9 million in Israel alone, let alone the Arabs of the territories, let alone Gaza. So from 300,000, and let alone Jordan, the whole country of Jordan. So this land was empty. And it's only because Jews have come back and built what we've built that it's attractive to Arabs. Because the people who today call themselves Palestinians, that identity exists to displace us. So this kid was groomed from birth with hatred for Jews, hatred of Jews. Some of it comes from the Quran, some of it comes from the layers of hatred that the Palestinian Authority build on top of the Quran. Because the Quran is a fundamental basis. The Quran tells them that the Jews have corrupted the word of God. What they call the Quran, they say, they teach their kids, this Quran is the truth. The Torah, which the Jews have, is a lie that the Jews fabricated before the Quran was written. That's what they teach their kids about us. And this kid of 17, who comes from a nice house, you can see his house, it'll be knocked down soon, God willing. Comes from a nice house, nice clothes, you can see his social media profile. He's not poor, he's not living in a refugee camp, he's not desperate. He had a future if he chose it, but he chose instead to murder my friend, to stick a knife, to walk up to my friend, who was a karate instructor, who was the toughest badass fucking you can imagine, who knew how to fight, knew how to shoot. But he made a mistake. I mean, I won't criticize him, but he was speaking on his phone or talking to his phone or looking at his phone instead, and he didn't have his back to the wall. And he knows that. And I know he knows this because we've talked about situational awareness. I know what's behind me right now. In fact, I've got a fence behind me. Not ideal, but a kid walked up behind him and just stabbed him. And this kid, you know, my other friend who's been hacked with a machete and survived, she feels guilt now because how could she get hacked 13 times with a big machete and live? And how can a big, huge, strong Ari Fuld have this little kid stab him with a little knife and he, well, it went through his back, into his lungs, severed an artery. And the amazing thing is that he should have just dropped. It was the kind of wound that Ari should have just crumpled up and lain in a heap. But I'll post the videos later. I've got them all. I don't know, I haven't even, maybe I'll overlay them into this video. But I don't like looking at death. I don't want to look at his death anymore. Because it is his death, he died there. And there's a video of him running away from one of the security cameras. You can see the blood stain growing on his shirt as he runs past, pulling his gun. And by chasing this kid, by shooting at him, whether he hit him or not, whether someone else took him down or not, the action that Ari did made it clear who was the assailant, who was the murderer, and who was the, I'm not going to say victim, but who was the target. And that's very important in one of these terrorist situations because it stops there being a crossfire and because, you know, we're an armed populace here, especially up in the Gush, thank God. We're an armed population. We defend ourselves. And that's who Ari is. He's the Jew that we are. He's not the cattle truck Jew. He's not the Jew that we used to be. He's not the Jew that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party prefer. He's not the Jew that says, you know, we can discuss things. No, you pull out your knife, he shoots you. If he'd seen the guy pull out his knife on anybody else, Ari would have drilled this guy in the head. It would have been a double tap to the chest and one to the head for sure. That's what Ari would have done. If he had seen this kid attacking someone else, the kid would be dead. And somebody else maybe would be alive. But Ari was the target. And in some ways, because Ari was the target, that's why it stopped at one dead Jew, one murdered Jew. This is murder, not killing. And yeah, I clickbaited Tommy into this. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to explain to you now. The way that jihad is taking place in Britain is a rape jihad against your daughters. And every now and then one of them goes stabby on or drives their car into you on Westminster Bridge, and then you have a whole big discussion about what the motive is here. You think you understand that the motive is clear, that because this guy was a settler, and because this was a settlement, that's the motive. But not. No, Islam is the motive. The settlement is the excuse you put into your head. Because I assure you, what's happening in Britain is that your towns and cities have now been settled. They have been conquered. If you walk into parts of London, parts of Bradford, Birmingham, Luton, if you walk into any of those places as a white British person, or even a Sikh British person, or a Hindu British person, or any of these other types of British person who are what is called kuffar, God forbid you're a Jew or an Israeli, if you walk into one of those places, you are encroaching on their settlement. You are the occupier. You are coming to take their place. And anything that befalls you is your fault. Just the same as you in the rest of the world will say that, well, you know, Ari had it coming because of where he lived. Bullshit. He was living in the heart of Judea. Judea. The clue is in the name. Judea. Jews are from Judea. Judaism is from Judea. Judaism starts in places like Hebron, okay, with a V. Hebron in English. Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. This is the genesis. This is where Israel and the Jewish people and the Jewish state come from. Okay? That's where we had our cultural awakening. It doesn't matter where my white skin spent 1,000 years, because many of us are dark skinned. Only racists are concerned about skin tone. My heart is Jewish. I follow Jewish customs and traditions. I fast on Yom Kippur. I do other things that are Jewish. I do some things that are not Jewish, but there's a soul to me. It's called my neshama, the Jewish soul, and that was the neshama. That was what Ari was using when he jumped over a wall, staggered, got back up, and aimed and shot. Because there's no way his body was able to do that. Your body can't, when you've had a severed artery and a punctured lung, you cannot run and fight. It can't be done. And you've got to get this in Britain. So what I said earlier in my scope is that the second bravest person I know is Tommy Robinson. He's adamant. He doesn't want to plead guilty to saying the truth about Islam in Britain as a crime. He did say true things about Muslims, Islam, rape gangs, and the men who rape young children in Britain. That's their act of jihad against you. Just as this was an act of jihad, they're stabbing us, okay? Their capacity to mount large suicide bombings has diminished because we've fought like hell to make that so. So they're left with stabbing us, 17-year-olds just going stabby. And you pay for it, by the way, in Britain. If you're watching from Britain and Europe, Americans are largely cutting the funds. Trump is cutting the funds. He's going to stop the funds, I think. But you in Britain, your foreign aid budget, instead of paying for your hospitals, which are filled with immigrants and with all sorts of other problems you've got, instead of paying for those things for you, or police, to prosecute you for bad words on Twitter, instead of paying for that stuff, you're paying the salary, you're paying the family of this little murderer who murdered my friend. So now there are 3 people I know. I mean, I know others. Listen, you don't have to be here all that long. I've got one friend whose daughter was blown up in a pizza bar. I've got another friend who watched her friend hacked to death in front of her, and she survived. That's Kay Wilson, who joined us on the tour when we had Tommy Robinson in Israel. She was our tour guide. Tommy didn't know how to talk to her at first. When I said, I organised the trip for Tommy to come here, and then I said to him, oh, and this woman, Kay Wilson's going to be our tour guide. You should look her up, watch her story. And he didn't. And then a couple of weeks later he did. And then he rang me and he said, how the hell do I talk to Kay Wilson? She was stabbed by Muslims for being a Jew. And I said, she's largely over it now. Well, she's not, but that's not the point. They tried to kill her. She survived. We eat. Ari is that guy. Ari should have survived. He should have had Yom Kippur, and we should have all had a big get-together in Sukkot and sat in the sukkah under a cover, and that's next week's holiday, and that's what I should have been doing with Ari Fuld. And I won't see him again, and I won't see him at any other tours. I was on a tour of the Shomron with him, where we stood above Nablus looking down at the biblical Jewish town of Shechem, around which there is a new city called Nablus. Let me tell you the name Nablus. Nablus is a corruption of a Roman word. The corruption is, it was called Neopolis, new city. After they destroyed Jerusalem, they needed a city, so they built one around this tiny little Jewish thing where Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, Joseph is buried there in a place called Shechem. Around Shechem, they built what is today an Arab town. And the only reason it's Arab is because Jews are literally forbidden by Israeli law from going into it. Why? Because there's a significant chance that if a Jew walks into Nablus and they know he's a Jew, they'll kill him. And we just don't want the hassle, or kidnap him. We don't want the hassle. So Jews are forbidden from going into Nablus. So I was on a hill overlooking Nablus with a group of people learning about the area, and Ari Fuld was standing next to me in the picture we all took. That was Ari. He was interviewing, he was doing live streams, he was talking about the place, he was educating. Now, I don't think even his brother, Hillel, who I know quite well, had realised Ari's reach and the impact he'd had on so many people. Another friend of mine in Florida put together a GoFundMe. It's raised a lot of money for his family, which just couldn't be... I'm so happy about that, but I'm so just devastated that is what happened. And Ari was the guy. He was a huge friend of Ryan Bellerose, who's my other friend from Canada, the big, giant, Métis, Canadian Native American, First Nation American, whatever you call First Nations people. He and Ari got on like a house on fire because they were both fighters, they were both shooters, they both knew how to shoot. And we don't know what. But the one thing is that we know we have to carry on, whether it's these little periscopes that I do. And I get a few times, if I'm talking about Tommy, say, and I'm in the park and I'm saying, I'm Brian of London, I'm in Tel Aviv, in Israel. Why are you saying that? Well, you know what? If you have a problem with it, just go away. I'm a Zionist. Zionist just means Jews want to live in Israel, this land, this little land, this one little piece of the Middle East, one tiny part of the Middle East for Jews. There's hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of Arab Muslim lands conquered by Islam. Jews just want this one little bit to be Jewish in. That's what Zionism. I'm a Zionist. Tommy's been here. I've supported Tommy since the beginning, since the EDL days. I was working behind the scenes in the EDL. Yeah, I was. Not because I'm a Mossad guy and I was running the EDL as a Mossad operation. That would be nice. I would have had at least money for it. I don't. I never got paid. I never got any money. I got, in fact, ostracized from the Jewish community, both there and here to a certain degree. Some of that's starting to come around because a lot more people now understand Tommy's fight and Britain's fight. My coffee's gone cold. The fight is one and the same. You don't think it is, but you are fighting in Britain to not let your land be conquered by Islam. Israel After the Romans conquered us 2,000 years ago, we didn't have the power, we didn't run the place, and eventually, Crusades and Saladin later, it wound up conquered by Islam and ruled by Islam, and it turned into a putrid, dying, dead swamp. And once that happened, getting your land back from Islam is unbelievably difficult. And what it took 6 million of us being slaughtered. Now, we started taking back our land way before, in the late 1800s, but it was only when we realized that there was never going to be a safe place in the world for Jews again. We would never allow ourselves to live under the protection of others. That's why Jews are going to leave Britain when Corbyn, if and when Corbyn takes over. It's not because Corbyn is going to be Hitler and round up Jews. I don't believe that. But because we know that Corbyn opens the door to the hatred of Jews, and once the door is open to the hatred of Jews, that leads to us not being safe. And the only way we're safe today is because we sit here in Israel. There's 8 million or so, 7 and a bit million of us. We've got tanks, lots of tanks. More tanks actually than Europe. I like saying that, more tanks than Europe. I think the combined armies of Germany, France, Britain's got more horses than tanks now. I think your cavalry is 600-700 horses. You don't have that many tanks. We out-tank Britain. That's just the tanks. We have more planes, we have nuclear weapons, we have submarines. We don't have the power to project force, except over the land. We could probably drive to Baghdad or Amman or Damascus. We could drive there, we could take it. But we don't want to, because Israel is where we are. And the reason we fight for Israel is because it's the last place that Jews will be. It's the place we know we can be safe because we're in control of our destiny. And what you Brits have to do is take back your destiny from the elites who run you. Your elites, the people who are going to try Tommy on Thursday for whether it is legal to say that Muslims are 85 to 90% of rape gangs for the crime of grooming small children to become sex slaves, is whether 85% to 90% of the convictions for that are Muslim men. They are, out of a population of 2 or 3% of the UK, for Muslim men. If the total Muslim population is 5 or 6%, then men is 2 or 3%. That's a crime in Britain. Your elites have allied themselves with Islam. They have adopted Islamic Sharia. They have adopted the entire canon of Muslim law to say, you shall not criticize any aspect of Islamic religious observance. And that's how you lose your country. You're going to lose your country. You will find that you will be called occupiers in an Islamic Britain. That's the position now that actually happens 50, 60 kilometers from where I'm sitting. I mean, really, the Arabs say that all of this is occupied. They say Tel Aviv, where I'm, is occupied. They've always rejected the existence of a Jewish state here. And that's what will happen to you. The existence of a British state run along Judeo-Christian values, Western civilization, those values will be crushed by Islam. You will lose the country. And when you fight to take it back, they will tell you you are settlers and that you are dead. And don't let that happen to you. I'm telling you. Don't listen to liberal Jews in Britain. Don't listen to the left wing. Don't listen to the far left. Don't listen to Corbyn. Don't listen to any of them. Don't listen to the lies about Israel and that we're killing Palestinians. We have to kill a lot more of them, actually. We need to be much stronger here. I really hope we pick our game up here, because we're not fighting an enemy that responds to Western ideas of fairness, and that's not how it works here. Just remember my friend Ari Fuld. I'll put his videos out. If you haven't seen them, because you haven't seen them in your press, because, you know, what's another Jew being murdered? He deserved it anyway. What's another Jew being murdered? You don't care. When you see the pictures of him being stabbed in the back and turning around, how do you do that? The guy stabbed you in the back, you turn around, you throw a punch, he runs, and then you chase him while your artery and your lung is bleeding out through your back. And you pull your gun and you draw a bead and you shout, "Pigua, pigua." You shout, "Attack, attack." And you point, and then others can take care of it. And then you just crumple up and die outside your supermarket, 4 kilometers from your home. And then we all have to stand there as you're buried in the middle of the night. And about Jewish funerals. Yes, we put people in the ground, and then what usually happens after someone dies or is murdered in this case, you have what's called a shiva, 7 days of mourning. And the families sit at their home and people come and pay their respects, and the family tear their clothes, and we bury people as fast as possible. It's a part of a cleanliness thing. You don't want bodies overheating. Now, the reason I think that the family buried him at midnight was because 2 days after the murder was Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur means, when you have Yom Kippur interrupting this Shiva, this 7 days of mourning, it means that the Shiva stops. And so this guy was he was a quiet, unknown, but hugely known figure. And many people would come to the Shiva, but unfortunately, because of Yom Kippur, there would only be 2 days of Shiva instead of the 7. So by burying him at midnight, that meant that there would be 2 days. If they waited till the next day, there would only be 1 full day of Shiva. So I think that was why he was buried so quickly. Because the time elapsed from me finding out. I found out that he'd been murdered because I saw a tweet by his brother Ari Fuld at about 11 o'clock in the morning saying, and I couldn't believe it. I'd heard about the attack, but I hadn't heard who it was. I've spoken so long, I'm going lightheaded. So the reason that they were, that was, I think, the reason why he was buried so quickly. Normally it's quick. I mean, I knew it would be the next day, or even the afternoon, but they arranged it for midnight, and just thousands of people came. Thousands. It was like, someone said to me, it was like one of these, when like a big famous rabbi dies here, you can see thousands of black hats. But this was young, religious Zionists, men, women, everybody, mixed, armed, rifles, guns. It was fantastic. And someone said to me, one of my friends who was there were more people at that funeral. If we'd have had that many people armed that way to defend Jerusalem in 1948, we would never have lost it to the Jordanians. If we'd have had that many people to defend the Gush, we'd have never lost it. We'd have been on that land from 1948 as we should have been. If we'd have had as many people as were at Ari Fuld's funeral with as many weapons. That was a well-armed funeral. I felt very, very comfortable in that crowd. It was horrible, but it was like, people would just walk past you and you get banged by rifles. It's like only in Israel, you're standing at a funeral. Nobody's dressed. By the way, people did dress up. They wore nice, the kind of untorn jeans and white shirts. I barely had time. I sort of rushed home, did what I had to do with the kids, and then organised this lift, and we left Tel Aviv at 9:30 at night. I took my wife's car, actually. I took my big 4x4, which is my wife's car, instead of my car. I just felt more comfortable in a big thing, because you have to drive through, you drive through a checkpoint to go up to Gush Etzion. So as you leave the bits of Israel that we did manage to hold on to in 48, you drive through a checkpoint. Nobody's looking as you leave, but when you come back, so at 3 a.m, we were in a line of cars because so many people had gone to this funeral. We were in a line of cars, and you slow down, and the soldier, you wind your window down, and the nice little, it's usually a young female soldier for us, I'll go into another time. She looks in the car, and her colleagues are standing around, and they've got their guns and so on, and there's barriers that they can raise in a second if they need to. And because you're leaving this area and going back into old Israel, it's bullshit. But So I took my big 4x4 because I felt better in that car. Up in this huge climb, and you're in this funeral, but we were standing in absolute silence. We got there, I think by the time we walked from the parked car, it was about 11:30, which was when it was, no, it was about 10:30 when we got up there, that's right. And it was due to start at 11:30, and we're just standing, and I see a few people I know, I say hello, but we're not talking. There's thousands of people, there's people arriving, and it's quiet. I'm in a coffee place now, there's 3 other people. There's more noise here than there was outside that funeral. And I'm talking away like a jabberbox. It was quiet. And the only thing that happened was people started singing some traditional mourning songs. And it just this unbelievably beautiful sound from inside joined from outside. And then when the actual funeral started, which only started at about 12:15, like I say, we stood there for more than an hour and a half before it actually started. And it was half in Hebrew, mostly in English, because his family spoke in English. They all speak perfect Hebrew, but they're ex-Americans. I was kind of, again, bizarre Israeli thing. We're all pulling out our phones, looking at Facebook live streams from inside the building 15 feet to our right, watching the screen just to see the faces. But you hear on the loudspeakers, you hear what's happening, and then you're watching a delayed picture from inside. Everything about it was just horrible and surreal. But for those of you who are not Jewish, there is the Jewish mourning, the way we deal with mourning people in Judaism is unbelievably beautiful. It's comforting, it's respectful, it does everything you kind of need. And as I say, I stood there surrounded by people, all young, old, but a really young crowd. I heard lots of English as well. I heard lots of Hebrew, but a kind of mixed crowd, Anglos, non-Anglos. As I say, arms, good, sidearms, pistols, rifles, soldiers in uniform, everything, the full range. You get people are moving past you, young girls carrying M16s. You know, sort of you get nudged a bit, and it's a rifle butt in your back. And like I say, there was an army, there was a brigade. In fact, the father of Ari Fuld's father mentioned that Richard Kemp, the former commander of British Armed Forces Afghanistan, he had tweeted about Ari Fuld because he knew him. In fact, I think it was at the event where Ari took the picture with Kemp. I was there, in fact, with a British soldier who came up with me, former para, Daniel, who had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, who's Israeli now. He's moved here. He's Jewish, and he served in the paras. He was standing next to me. That's who we are now. We're part of Israel, part of Jews. Who we are now is a warrior Jew. That's it. I'm not too flabby, but I didn't serve. I got here when I was just about 39, and they didn't call me up. I'd love to go for training. I'd love to be part of the army. I'm too late, really. But that's who we are. That's who we're not going to lose that. That's about it. I don't know, 45 minutes. I don't know how many of you have stuck with me from the beginning. I've seen a few pricks come up in comments, which I've squashed, but that's my friend Ari Fuld, who was murdered by an Arab shouting Allahu Akbar on Sunday. An Arab who will probably live out the rest of his life in an Israeli prison, who will be paid by the West unless we stop that. And that's what Islam does. Meanwhile, Jews will carry on building something great here. this amazing city in which I am and the park I'm in. That's what Jews will do. We'll create, they'll destroy. Sukkot starts on Sunday. That's a great festival. I'll tell you more about that soon. And thank you for watching. See you all next time. I'm Brian of London in Tel Aviv. Mourning my friend Ari Fuld. Hoping a good outcome for Tommy on Thursday. And hoping that Britain manages to survive its Islamic invasion.